Hello, dear listeners. Have we got another star-studded week for you? On this week's episode of You Are What You Read, we're joined by the film historian and acclaimed New York Times bestselling biographer, Scott Eyman. Now, for anybody who listens to this podcast, you know that I am a Scott Eyman superfan. I can't tell you which of his books is my favorite, but the current one that we're going to present today is right up there at the top. He wrote some of the great biographies of the film industry. Cary Grant, A Brilliant Disguise, John Wayne, Life and Legend. And then really, if you want to understand how film became an art form and was actually invented, you're going to want to read Print the Legend, The Life and Times of John Ford. You're going to want to read The Speed of Sound, Hollywood and the Talkie Revolution, 1927 to 1930, which is really when the whole thing blew up. He has written about American cinematographers, directors like Ernst Lubitsch. Laughter in Paradise is one of my favorites because it's about film comedy. And then actors, including Mary Pickford, Henry Fonda and James Stewart, Hank and Jim, Charlie Chaplin. I could keep going. But today, we're bringing out his brand new book, Joan Crawford, A Woman's Face. This one really is the first telling of Joan Crawford in full. Her professional life, her personal life, her dreams, her hopes, and her background. Here is the spectacular Scott Eyman, an expert. I adore him, and he's here to talk about the great Joan Crawford. What is it that drives you about going back and researching these folks? Because I'm agog at it.
Well, if I had to break it down into one or two things, what interests me about it is the system, because it's a system that basically worked. Most movies made some money. Everybody was fully employed. It was a viable, functioning capitalist system, and that no longer exists. Certainly not in the movie business, or in the streaming business, for that matter. Well, the streaming business, yes, that's true. That's not quite true. Streaming business does exist, but the streaming business is a transient system. I see it as a 10 or 15-year thing, and then it'll be replaced by something else. But the movie system from say 1915 to say 1975, somewhere in there, made sense. And it wasn't just a capitalistic success. The movies were pretty damn good, especially when you look at what we're watching now. When, months can go by, literally 3, 4 months can go by. And how was it? It was all right. Yeah, but you don't really, there's nothing to make you pick up the phone and call your friends and say, Jesus, you got to see this. It doesn't happen very often. Whereas when we were growing up, it happened all the time, you know, and when our parents were growing up and our grandparents were growing up, it happened all the time. So what intrigues me is to investigate a system that actually worked, as opposed to a system in a various stage of nervous breakdown, which is where we're
So
at now.
we're talking about the studio system
Uh-huh.
that was the system in place, the companies in place that competed with one another. That's another thing you get into
Uh-huh.
in the Joan Crawford story, A Woman's Face, that you really get into, which is this idea that the competition between those studios really gave the cream,
Uh-huh.
gave the audience the best options for what they were going to see at the movies.
And
That
part of the reason
Mhm,
for the strength of the system was because
mhm.
the founding fathers were basically in control for decades and decades. Jack Warner ran Warner Brothers from, 1923 till 1967, you know. Louis B. Mayer ran it from 1924 to 1951. I mean, we're
151.
talking a quarter century, 35 years. These are nothing like that exists anymore. If you get 8 years in running a movie company, they talk about you like you're Jack Warner or something, and you're not. But
Mhm.
it's just a very transient system. and it's breaking down fast because of the decline of the theater business. And they have to, and the streaming thing is an entirely different. Streaming is more disposable. Streaming is
Yeah.
disposable, whereas movies tended to hang around, not just in the theaters, but in the cultural memory. Who remembers the Ben Affleck Netflix movie from 4 years ago?
Can't help you.
You can't, not
Can't help
exactly.
you.
But you remember the Jimmy Stewart movie from 1958,
I remember A
Vertigo.
Man's Castle from
Exactly,
1933.
exactly.
You know, I mean, I could chapter and verse, or the writers that brought this, and that's
Yeah,
another river
yeah,
in Joan Crawford's A Woman's Face, is you bring the writers out. And I don't think in a very, very long time, and you know, Scott, you have super fans everywhere. And some of my favorite people in the movie business and also in academia and beyond think you're the guy because you write these stories with so many layers to them. They're like
mhm,
Napoleon's, the dessert, because you learn about everything in this effortless reading. For example, I'll just throw this out and you could talk about it. Joan Crawford had a dinner party at her house, and Charles MacArthur and Helen Hayes brought F. Scott Fitzgerald. And he wasn't cutting it in Hollywood. And that's what they said he really started drinking.
sure.
You know, people talk about him, but it was a system that paid the greatest writers, novelists, they just come out, we'll take care of you.
Yeah,
And that exists, but it's different now.
yeah.
It certainly isn't. There's no there when you get there.
No, and when you get there, the people that hired you are gone because the turnover is fierce. Nobody's there for
Mhm.
25, 30 years. They're just not. I mean, Kathleen Kennedy just retired from Lucasfilm after 15 years, and considering the pictures she made, it's a miracle. But 15 years is a long haul in the
Oh,
modern environment.
that's a century
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
them.
yeah. So it's a totally different way of looking at movies. It's a totally different system than what we have now, and essentially, it's gone. It's
It's
with the
not there
wind,
anymore.
gone with the wind. It's
Mm-mm.
not there anymore. So I'm doing partially biography, but I'm also doing archaeology, and I'm also doing cultural history. And if one part gets a little dull, I can always hop over to archaeology or cultural history if the career is in the doldrums. And Joan went through a couple of doldrum periods, you know.
She
So
sure did. She
I
sure
could
did.
switch over. I could switch over to the big picture, the long shot, as it were. You go from close up to a long shot, and you show
Hmm.
the landscape and how the landscape has shifted and what that means to the individual career of an actress.
And as a reader, it's masterful
Well, thank you.
because you are actually telling a story in the fashion or in the style of whatever the subject happens to be into the wider lens of the culture. And it was really interesting. And I was making notes as I went along about the different studios she worked for. Let's talk about Warner Brothers because they're in the news right now. It's kind of unbelievable what's going on when you look back at how that business was run. Because Warner Brothers wasn't considered, it was considered the gangster studio, wasn't it? That they did the rougher material. Can you
Cagney.
talk
Well,
about that?
it was a
Mm-hmm.
studio of tough mugs. Cagney, Bogart, Betty Davis. Yeah, I mean, people slapping each other around. It was not a genteel studio, with occasional exception for someone like Kay Francis, who wasn't there long, for instance.
She wasn't there long, but she did what they really would now be considered the serial television show. I mean, she
That's
did
true.
those nurse movies, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Errol
but
Flynn too.
nobody talks about her
Errol Flynn
anymore.
was a different
Yeah.
kind of tough mug. He was a tough mug as long as he had a sword in his hand.
Mhm.
But his projection was as a gentleman, you know, whether or not that
Mhm.
had anything to do with who he was. But what he
Mhm.
projected was of a cultured, sophisticated gentleman who happened to be a killer with a sword in his hand. Okay, but and Flynn was one of the biggest stars at the studio, commercially speaking,
Yeah.
as
Mhm.
was Cagney. So they had a high-low ethic at Warner Brothers because that was the kind of place it was. there weren't a lot of gentlemen and gentlewomen at Warner Brothers. It didn't, because Jack was a tough guy. Sam, well, Sam was dead. He died in 1927. But Harry was also a tough guy in a much more genteel way than Jack was. And the bridge between them was Sam. But Sam died in 1927, and Harry and Jack never got along, and they didn't like each other. So they settled down to this war of attrition where Harry ran the business and Jack ran the studio, basically. Jack made the movies and Harry did the business. And they didn't really get in each other's way, which is a beautiful thing. As long as Jack's pictures were good and the critics liked them and they made some money, Harry left him alone, and vice versa, and vice versa. So there was this kind of weird symbiotic relationship where everything was in equilibrium, in spite of the fact they didn't like each other. You know, and they were lucky. They were lucky because if they'd been at each other's throats, it wouldn't have worked, because their attention would have been diverted, and the energy that went into the movies would have had to go into survival of the fittest in the boardroom. If that makes any sense.
It totally does. It totally does. But the budgets, when we look at them now, to run a studio, I mean, of course, the goal was to make money, but there was a variety of films, as you said, the high, low, and then all that was in between. It kept people employed, certainly the writers.
Yeah, certainly.
Now we're in big trouble because we're in very big trouble because I don't know who's going to fund the kids that are 25 years old. I don't know how they're going to make enough points to be vested in the union.
Yeah.
And they're not worried about it, which is very interesting to me.
They're worried about their careers, or they're worried about the business, or
they're
both?
not worried about the future, about their pensions, about making it as a writer for. They just think that they will. And the studio system, it's not that you were so much protected, and if you were a woman writer, forget it. I mean, we did okay till it started making money, and then they pulled the jobs from us, and now we're secretaries again. That happened, right?
Yeah.
So there's a very interesting, kind of turnover that's happening now, because there's no back end in television. And then in film, you know exactly what's happening. Your best shot is to do a streaming series. That at least you'll be paid up front. But the film business, you're right, is not there as it was. However, they're buying product, which is interesting.
Buying product in bulk. Where the script is less important than the genre. You know, if I have to look at one more Netflix movie about a serial killer on the lam, shot in colors of green and brown, I will kill myself. And they buy these things. There's 3 or 4 a year, and it's really staggeringly. It's just, and people say, well, what about a Jimmy Cagney gangster movie? I said, yeah, but a Jimmy Cagney gangster movie had energy. You know, the energy didn't just come from the quick cutting. It came from the performances. It came from the writing. Whereas the writing in these things is just incredibly sloppy, and the performances aren't any better, because you're not you're not hiring good actors. You know, you're hiring ex-wrestlers. Really.
It's so true. It's so true. And all these foreign-made episodics and even movies that are done are so sloppy. And it there isn't the pantheon, the constellation of stars that deliver a product that you can count on. And Crawford really did until she couldn't.
Right.
She really cared about the scripts. She knew who to be in the movies with. But let's start at the fundamental, because you titled it Joan Crawford, A Woman's Face. This is really interesting. A star, and we've talked before about the stars that we love, but this particular face was something else.
That's why I love the cover so much.
Yeah. I'm in love with the cover, and I just put it up like on my mantle when I was reading it, because I just loved it so much. Yeah. She is a completely modern entity here. This could be today.
The nails alone.
the nails alone,
Yeah,
which Lynn will tell you, it's the nails, right?
yeah.
And that's part of it. And but then there is this presence of her
Mhm.
that I think was fueled by sheer survival instincts. I mean, she knew how to turn herself into the best version of what God gave her.
Mhm.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, look at the face. Now, she's not conventionally beautiful. Her eyes are too big for her head, for instance, one thing. On the other hand,
Mm-hmm.
look at the eyes. They're stunningly beautiful eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can't see, for instance, she was covered with freckles. She had freckles all over her face, which you didn't see in the movies because they covered it with pancake. But in candid shots, and she was not. The interesting thing is she was not afraid of candid shots. And in the home movies that I write about, there's these close-ups taken by her boyfriend at the time where the camera's right on her, 16 millimeter Kodachrome, and you see these covered with freckles. So she's starting at, you know, and it's not like she intent. And the key to this thing, and it's just hard to realize, I don't think she had ever had any intention to be an actress. She wanted to be a dancer. Her ambition was to dance. So she gets to Chicago and she gets a tryout for the Schuberts, and they take her to New York, and she spends a year in New York dancing for the Schubert brothers in musicals. And I think she was perfect. I think that was her goal. I think she was perfectly happy. She knew Ruby Stevens, who changed her name to Barbara Stanwyck. They were friends. Ruby was dancing for not the Schuberts, but the other guys that were behind it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they were friends, and she was going out with nice guys who wanted to go out with chorus girls, and they had money. And I mean, this was paradise compared to Kansas in the winter, which
Well, you paint her upbringing. It's Dickensian almost,
yeah,
American
it's pretty grim.
Dickensian.
It's not
It's
Chaplin
pre-
exactly, but it's not
it's
too
pretty
far off.
grim.
It's within the room. It was rough. Her father was gone before, either just before she was born or just after she was born. She never knew him. She paid for his funeral, but she never knew him, which I thought was big of her. I'm not sure I would have paid for his funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it was a rough, rough childhood. And with no education to speak of, her mother bartered her real name was Lucille Lusur. Her mother bartered Lucille's junior high and high school education for labor. She had to work her way through both junior high and high school in the kitchen of and doing beds in these in schools. So she didn't attend an awful lot of classes because they had her working like a slavey, like in a Mary Pickford movie, a Dickensian thing. So when she had one semester college at Stevens College in Missouri, and it was way over her head. She didn't know what the hell they were talking about. So she only lasted the one semester, and she goes back with her tail between her legs to Kansas City, and she decides, well, I want to be a dancer because that she could do. She knew she loved to dance, so follow your affinity. If that's your favorite thing on earth, if you feel free when you're dancing, try to be a dancer. And she became a dancer. Now, in all honesty, as her occasional musicals will show, she wasn't a great dancer. She ain't Ginger Rogers. As I think I describe her in the book as basically it's picking them up and laying them down. But there was a market for girls that could pick them up and lay them down in 1920s New York. So she got the gig in New York. And then there's this wild fluke. She gets a screen test for MGM, and they liked her, and she looked good. She photographed, and you can't fake photographing. The camera likes you, or it goes blah. You know, and the camera liked her, so off she goes to L.A. And suddenly she has to learn how to be an actress at the age of 20 years old, and it was all Oz to her. And there was no Tin Man to help her, and no Cowardly Lion to help her. She was on her own. Uh, she made friends at the studio. She had a good instinct for survival. And that's a valuable trait, survival instinct. You can't teach it. Someone's born with it or they don't have it. But she
She
had
also
survival.
assumed a persona of grace and elegance,
Mhm.
which was not her background at all.
And it
I
took
mean,
her a
she
while.
tried.
It took her a
It,
while. The early
the way she spoke, it was almost British.
Yes, and she had a beautiful voice. She had a good speaking voice. She had a really good low kind of speaking voice, not shrill at all. She was lucky in that sense. But she had to learn how to act from the ground up. It's not like she'd spent 3 years on Broadway and 5 years in stock. She hadn't. So it was what seemed to her to be agonizing and slow. To us, it seems fast because she gets there at the end of beginning of 1925, and by 1927 she's kind of a quasi star. And in 1928 she does Our Dancing Daughters, and she is a star. So 3 years start to finish. That's pretty fast. But to her, she was a kid on a high wire and no balancing pole the whole time. When you really dive in and read her interviews and read the interviews of people her best friends like William Haynes and John Arnold, the head cameraman at MGM, she was walking through a minefield every day on that lot. She never felt secure until she did. She never felt like an actress until she did, and it took a long time before she had professional security, before she had emotional security. The professional security came first. The emotional security came a lot ah late, late, yeah, surprisingly late. You'd think someone after 20 years would be okay with themselves and be okay with their place in the world, but I think she was always more conscious of the potential for loss than she was for what the success that she'd already had. I think in the back of her mind, and this is not atypical for someone who comes up the hard way. In the back of her mind, I think she always thought it could all go away overnight, overnight. Because she'd seen it go away for other people in the movie business. She saw it go away for Billy Haynes. Billy Haynes was a big star 1 year, and the next year he was got unemployed, and he stayed unemployed until he reinvented himself as a designer, you know? And there were other people like that in the movie business. They said the wrong thing to the wrong people, or their type went out of style, or they were too expensive, and the studio just cut back payroll. Things happen. It's a tough business then. It's a tough business now. And she'd seen that, and she figured if it happens to him, it happened to her. It could happen to me. It could happen to me. And it never quite did happen to her, but I think she always saw it around the corner. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think at the end, she was okay emotionally, but she cut back physically to such an extent. Her environment had gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. She's living in a two-bedroom apartment in New York City. And it was a decent two-bedroom apartment in New York City, but it wasn't Brentwood, you know? It wasn't Brentwood at all. But she preferred New York to LA. Her career, I believe she could have sustained her career longer if she stayed in LA, but out of sight, out of mind. And by making the decision to stay in New York, I think she cut herself off from the thread of her career, which she never would have done if you told her she was going to do that 15 or 20 years earlier. She said, cut myself off from my career? Never. But she did it knowing that it would probably have a negative impact on getting jobs. Why? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, true, true. So it did make sense. It did make sense. Myrna Loy was here too. Myrna Loy was here too, one of her oldest friends. Loretta Young. Loy Young was in and out. Young would come in and out. Loy was here full time. Loy was in New York full time. Melvin Douglas was here full time. Yeah, there were people here, but it wasn't the business. She was leaving the biz. She was giving the business a stiff arm and going to a different place. And that actually is a really interesting transition for a woman who at that point is 52, 53. Real interesting because she's leaving behind, I think knowingly leaving behind that which had defined her, which is her career. Mhm. Yeah, successfully. Like 8 to 10 years of a show. She did very, very well for herself and worked very little after that. She didn't want to, I guess. Mhm. Easy. Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, all those guys went strong into their 50s and in some cases their 60s. 'Cause it's profoundly different system. Whereas Joan Crawford's doing, Autumn Leaves in 1956, which I think is the best of her late pictures, a picture I really like. And the general attitude, "What is this old broad still doing in front of a camera?" You know? You can see the undercurrent. I mean, every review would, begin by enumerating she'd been a movie star for 30 years, emphasizing her age. Well, they weren't doing that when Jimmy Stewart's romancing Kim Novak in Vertigo, you know? I mean, and Jimmy Stewart had been a star since what, 1935, 36, you know? So, roughly equivalent period, or, he's a little younger than Crawford, but not much, not much. So there was definitely a different system of judging middle-aged actors as opposed to middle-aged actresses. Mhm. No, she had like 5 husbands. Yeah. Mhm. I mean, no, you don't want it. You know, if she and William Wyler had ever married, they would have killed each other. I mean, she only was she a woman like Betty Davis is only going to marry a submissive man because she had a will to power. She really did have a will to power, and she ran every set that was her movie from like except for Wyler. Wyler wouldn't take it, and he would beat her to death, and he beat her to give the performance he demanded. But every other director folded. Every other director folded in the face of Betty Davis. Right. No patience. No patience. Yeah, well, that's crucial. That's crucial. She would have been a great producer. Davis would have been a great producer, you know, because she did understand scripts, and that's the foundation. Let's face it. That's the foundation. Yeah. All right. Mhm. Mhm. Sure. Fresho. Yeah. Yeah. He was a very good actor and an ambitious actor and a good actor. He didn't not so much in movies. He's good in movies, but he was his when you look at his credits on stage, you're thinking, "Whoa." I mean, he's doing Chekhov, he's doing Uncle Vanya. I mean, of course, he was with the group theater when he met Crawford, but I mean, he was a serious guy. He wasn't in it for champagne and blondes. Because he didn't particularly like being the guy in a tuxedo in the 1930s. He didn't wanna be Robert Montgomery, you know? He wanted to be a serious actor, and there was really not a venue for him to be a serious actor in 1930s Hollywood. You were a leading man or you were a character actor, and he looked like a leading man. He was tall, he was handsome, he was elegant. So they cast him in these champagne and, caviar movies, and he didn't respect them. He wanted to be doing Clifford Odets. So he had to go back to New York and reinvent himself after World War II, basically, which he did. And he ends up doing Mickey 1 with Warren Beatty and In Harm's Way for Otto Preminger, and then he got sick and died. But if you look at his theater credits, you can tell he was a serious guy. He is also wealthy, and he had money of his own, which meant he only Hollywood was kind of a joyride for him. We'll try it, we'll see what happens. But he wasn't emotionally committed because he didn't need the money. He could always afford to walk away. And that's a big differential between most of these people. Because you look at most of the leading men they're talking about, Cagney, Gable, Bogart came from money, but I don't know that he actually had any. I think it might have been gone by the time he got into show business. Uh, but a lot of these guys, they came from nothing. They came from Cadiz, Ohio. They came from oil fields. And as I write in the book, the affair between Gable and Crawford made perfect sense. They were both mutts who thought they were lucky to have been adopted out of the pound by MGM. They were grateful, you know. And it wasn't until they looked around after 5 or 6 or 7 years that they realized actually they could tell MGM what to do because what they had was something most movie stars didn't have. It was transferable. They could go anywhere and be stars. It didn't depend on MGM. You know, Gable was going to be a star after he left MGM. Nothing, and his movies didn't get any better. As a matter of fact, after he left MGM, he made like one good movie in the last 10 years of his life was The Misfits. Other than that, they're just like commercial movies. But they had Clark Gable in them, and that was enough because there's only one Gable and there's only one Crawford. But Crawford had a tougher time because the rules were different for middle-aged women than they were for middle-aged men. That's the baseline. That's the baseline. And frankly, they still are. They still are. Yeah. Mhm. Joan Crawford weighed 125 pounds at MGM, and she weighed about 125 pounds when she died. Yeah, exactly. Because this was their shot, and they knew it was their shot, and they weren't going to blow it. It was all part and parcel of being what they needed to be in order to convert failure into success. No, no, no. Although very few were. Let's face it. There's a steady turnover then. There's a steady turnover now. You know? That was her out. That was her out. That was her graceful exit. She didn't have. I mean, she could sense the scripts weren't as good as they had been 10 years earlier. She's not working with John Garfield and making Mildred Pierce. She's working with Jeff Chandler at Universal, and over on the next lot is Abbott and Costello. Okay, so she wasn't stupid. She could sense what was happening, and she's 50 years old. Okay, that's always a problem if you're going to be a name above the title star. It's not a problem if you want to make the transition to character actor, but you don't make the money that you made as a star if you make the transition to character actor because you're in for 3 weeks as opposed to 8 or 10. Okay. So she knew that and she realized, and she had a certain standard of living, but she was willing because Al Steele was her road out of town, basically, because he was an industrialist. He had his own money. He loved her and he could talk her off the ledge on those occasions which she got a little crazy.
I think that was a good marriage,
I
from what
think it
I
was a
could
good, I think
tell.
it was a perfect marriage. Unfortunately, he died after 4 years, he had a bad heart. But and he didn't leave much because they'd spent so much money on this incredible apartment, co-op apartment that they'd remodeled. It's taken 18 months to remodel, and then she had to pay all that. And but Pepsi put her on the payroll on the board, and she had a contract I think for 6 years, 5 or 6 years after that. And then, but when she reached quote unquote 62 or 63, or her retirement age, they retired her, and then suddenly she had to live off what she had, and then she had kept the apartment, the big place, for a couple more years. but it just the overhead got too extreme, and she had to sell it, and she moved to a smaller place, and then she moved to a smaller place within that same building. So compared to the Brentwood place, compared to the palatial co-op she had with Al Steele, her circumstances were diminished. Although to give her all, she didn't really seem to mind. It didn't. I don't know that it really depressed her. If it did, she didn't articulate it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
And she didn't die
that's in.
broke. As I had her probate file. She left $1,400,000 in
That's a lot of money then.
1977. So
Come on.
that's like what, 5 million now, 6 million? I don't
Yeah,
know. But
it's a lot of money.
it's not a so she wasn't poor, but I'm sure she was worried. Well, do I have enough money to make it for 10 more years? That kind of thing that
Well,
happens
I,
when.
I was interested in that you chronicled this throughout, sort of who was around her helping her.
Yeah,
She had a lot of staff to turn into Joan Crawford.
yeah,
That was, she had a lot of people on the payroll.
she did.
And
Her
and as
clothes
she
were
got
custom.
older,
Yeah,
yes, she did not skimp there.
no.
And I have a friend who I met when I was living in the boarding house,
Mhm.
still my friend, D. Emerson. And Joan Crawford was brought down to Birmingham, Alabama by the Birmingham News. Her father was the ad guy there.
Uh-huh.
And she began a correspondence with Joan Crawford.
Uh-huh.
And I said to D, I said, D, by the way, the letters, just to cut to the chase, have been lost.
Okay,
But they wrote each other all the time.
sure.
And I thought, wow, Joan Crawford wrote you letters, having met you through your father
Uh-huh.
when you were a kid.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was fascinating. Who does that?
She did that all the time. If you wrote her a Christmas card, she'd write you a note thanking you for the Christmas card. She loved she loved that kind of contact because when you're a movie star, you don't see anybody except the people at the studio, basically. You know, you don't want to go out in public unless it's very controlled conditions. So you don't see a lot of people. So letters became became her way of keeping in touch with the general public, her fans, her friends from. And she didn't have any friends in Kansas, by the way. I've yet to see any letters addressed to anybody in Kansas or Texas. She'd left all that behind because she was a child when she left too at the same time. But that was not a place she ever wanted to visit or go back to that environment. But yeah, she was a compulsive correspondent. I mean, she would write, and she wrote them by hand. There's thousands of them, and they're written by hand. You'd think, and she had a secretary, but then she would write out the reply by hand, and then the secretary would type it up. Yeah, it's a lot of waste motion, but it was all part and parcel of being Joan Crawford for her. Fan service. She was doing what amounted to fan service. Not in her portrayals particularly, not on screen, but in keeping in touch with her fans, in keeping the fan club appraised, writing a column for the fan club newsletter, all that kind of stuff. That was her fan service. There was a one-to-one correspondence between her and her public, and that's the most interesting thing about her because what she starts doing in 1928 is mirroring her audience, the Jazz Baby movies, Our Dancing Daughters, Our Modern Maidens, which are about comfortable girls in big city America who hit the wall at 70 miles an hour and how they survive or don't. Uh, and she made a series of those, and she's mirroring the audience. And then when the depression hits, then she plays these down at the heels girls,
Shop girls. Shop girls.
shop girls or factory girls working in factories
Factory.
for
How about that prison picture? She's in
75 cents
prison.
an hour with Possessed with Clark Gable, which is one of her best pictures, I think.
I think so too.
And she realizes, the character realizes, well, what have I got? What have I got to sell to make myself better? Well, I've got my looks, and that's pretty much it. She didn't have any position. She didn't have any money, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So the character is essentially she's the actress is mirroring the character and vice versa, and she does this all the way through the 40s with Mildred Pierce, which comes out in 1945, and the war's over. But all the millions of women have been running their families' lives while their husbands and boyfriends are off in Europe and fighting the war in Asia, and having to put the pieces of a life together. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but they'd had that experience. And then after the war, you get these pieces like Humoresque, where, and the Otto Preminger movie, Daisy Kenyon, where their career woman possessed, Humoresque rather, her career is drinking. In Daisy Kenyon, well, that's a career. It's an ambitious career
It
if
is.
you do it right.
Yeah,
If you do it right, there's a
sure.
lot to be said for it. Uh, and the career thing is not really satisfying, and it's not really working, and there's a lot of dissolution going on and alcohol. And then in the 50s, she's middle-aged and frankly living in a garden court apartment in Autumn Leaves off Hollywood Boulevard, and her father dies, and she's marooned in her 50s, marooned, and no one looks at her. She's anonymous. So this is Crawford instinctively portraying the lives of the women who loved Joan Crawford and went to see her in the movies. And in an emotional and psychiatric sense,
It's
I think she's
interesting.
also projecting herself into the life she could have had if she hadn't gotten lucky with MGM and the Schubert brothers leading to MGM. Because there is a certain amount of luck involved,
Oh my
in
God,
getting
yes,
noticed
yes.
and converting that opportunity. Because a lot of people got opportunities, but they couldn't convert them. She
But
converted it.
there's something hypnotic about her.
There
It's
is.
not, and you point that
And it's
out.
a great American story. It's
It
a great
really
American
is.
story. And she
It's.
sustained it for almost 50 years.
I mean, that's unheard of,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
Hepburn did it, but
Hepburn did it,
Hepburn was a different cat.
but
Different
Hepburn was
cat.
a different cat. Hepburn had money. Hepburn was
That's right.
born into wealth. Hepburn
And her
always
father invested her money the whole time.
Hopburn could always say screw off to Hollywood and go back to Connecticut, and she wouldn't have missed it very much at all. She would have missed the work, she would have missed the acting, but she didn't need the money, and she had her independence, and she also had that Yankee independent thing. Well, Crawford didn't have that. Crawford always
Mm-mm.
kind of half expected, I think, the carpet to be yanked out from underneath her. Hepburn never expected anybody to yank a carpet out. And indeed, nobody ever did yank the carpet out from Katharine Hepburn. It couldn't
Mm-hmm.
be done.
Mm-hmm.
But that inner security that Hepburn had came from privilege and came from money. And she projected that what me worry attitude for 50 years because it was very
Mm-hmm.
sincere. That's who she was.
Tell us about who Joan Crawford's friends were. Who were the ladies she relied on? Helen Hayes would have been one of them, I'm
Helen Hayes,
sure.
but Helen Hayes was in New York after 1935, 36, and only came to LA for work. But she was a theater actress, so she was working in New York or touring. So they didn't see each other that much. They wrote letters. Her closest friends were Stanwyck and Myrna Loy and Loretta Young. Those were her girlfriends. And of course, they're all working at the same time, and they're all working a lot. So I don't know that there aren't a lot of letters between them. But what I suspect they saw each other on the weekends, for coffee or something. And certainly she and Loy were always close because they could see each other at MGM and have lunch, if nothing else. And Stanwyck,
Don't you think Barbara Stanwyck looked at Joan Crawford and went, that face?
I
Don't you think?
think
Don't you think she
a
did?
lot of actresses looked at Crawford and said, "My God, that face."
Yeah, I mean, it was made for the camera.
It was. It was. It was.
And many people copied her nose that went to get a nose job.
Mhm.
That razor sharp nose she had.
Yeah, which shouldn't have worked, because it was a sharp nose. As you said, it's a
That's
sharp nose,
right.
but it did work. It did work. I think because the eyes softened everything. The chin was perfect. It was a strong chin, and the eyes softened the nose. Because after you really, when you see those eyes, you don't even look at the nose. You just look at the eyes, and that was lucky. And her face is wonderfully mobile and expressive, and you can't teach that either. It's like she's what's the phrase? The acting phrase in the moment. She's
Her
always in the
face,
moment.
her face aged
Mhm.
beautifully
Yeah,
because the bone structure was so strong.
yeah. And she refused to gain weight. She just never would gain weight. And if she ever gained weight, she lost it before when she got to work. She might have gained 5 pounds or something. But she was 140 when she got to MGM. And when you look at her stills in the first couple of appearances in anonymous parts in MGM, because she didn't get billing, she doesn't look like Joan Crawford because she weighs about 140 pounds. And you can't see the cheekbones, basically. The eyes are there, and her
Mhm.
hairstyle was kind of this Marcelled thing, and it wasn't flattering at all. But John Arnold, the head camera at MGM, said you got to lose some weight. So she lived on saltines and coffee and dropped 15 pounds, and that popped out her cheekbones, and that made a huge amount of difference because the cheekbones combined with the eyes, you know, and suddenly you could see the bone structure. You couldn't see the bone
Mhm.
structure before because she was 15 pounds too heavy. But when she lost
Now,
those, and it's not a lot of weight, 15 pounds you wouldn't think would make that much difference. Makes a huge difference. And
huge difference.
then
Yeah,
she
on a little
begins
woman.
learning how to act because she'd never acted before. And the key thing is working with Lon Chaney, which she talks about in her memoir. And she said, Lon Chaney taught me everything about the art of acting. So how did she phrase it? She said, Lon Chaney taught me the difference between standing in front of a camera and acting. And when you see her in the pictures with Chaney movies, I don't know if you've seen a lot of Chaney, Phantom of the Opera, Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
There's always a girl, and you never notice her because Chaney is so strong an actor. He's a big, big actor, and he's charismatic. There's always the makeup, and you're thinking, how did he pull this off with what they had to work with in 1925? So,
Hmm.
the girls are just interchangeable. Patsy Ruth Miller in Hunchback, and Mary Philbin in Phantom of the Opera, and all the other films he was making. But when he's working with Crawford in The Unknown, she holds the camera in a way that all these other girls didn't, opposite Lon Chaney. So it's not just the Lon Chaney show, it's the Lon Chaney and Joan Crawford show. And that's when her real career, I think, began to take hold at MGM because they could see that, wait, she's working with Chaney and you can't take your eyes off of her. And Chaney was the whole show in Lon Chaney movies. They were shot in 3 or 4 weeks, short money. They would reliably gross 3 or 4 times their cost. They were a profit tsunami for MGM because they were cheap to make because he was so easy to work with and he had a big audience out there. But suddenly, when he's in The Unknown, there's this weird sexual chemistry between him and her. And even when he's not in the scene, there's a sexual chemistry with her, and that's something different. And that is when she begins to pick up momentum within the studio. Within the
Wow.
studio.
And then
And
it
then
all
she
and then it
gets
blew up because they were looking for the girl
they were
to
looking
star in these movies for with yeah,
flapper movies. They were looking
the
for
flappers.
Claire Bow. They were looking for Paramount had Claire Bow, and they were looking for someone that could possibly do kind of the same thing. And what they found was someone who could actually do much more. That and
My gosh, if you could get in a lane that somebody had already snowplowed for
Mhm,
you, and make it distinctive and make it your
mhm,
own, you were on your way.
yeah. And Paramount basically screwed up Claire Bow. They made 15 lousy Clara Bow movies. MGM took much more care with Crawford's movies and cherished her and polished her and set her in beautiful settings by Cedric Gibbons and gowns by Adrian. And Paramount didn't give Clara Bow anything like the care that MGM gave Joan Crawford. So Clara Bow had a much shorter career. Clara Bow's out of the movies by 1932, 1933. And Crawford is just kicking into fourth gear at that point.
Wow. Do you, when you look at the landscape today,
Mm.
who's the closest actor that we have to Joan Crawford?
There's a we get these wonderful 27 and 28-year-olds who have everything going for them, and they disappear by the time they're 40. And I'm not sure why. But they don't just the career. We have all these talented, really talented actresses, but their careers don't sustain. And one day they show up, and you realize, oh, you're a character actress now. They're playing someone's mother, or they're playing someone with Alzheimer's disease.
Hmm. When I saw Hamnet,
Yeah,
which I think it's a
I haven't
masterpiece. Do
seen
you
it. I'm
agree?
looking forward to it.
Okay, okay, but you're going to see Emily Watson in it.
Sure.
That's an example of what you're talking about.
Exactly. 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 You don't careers aren't
Beautiful
sustained.
actor, beautiful actor.
You've got
Yeah.
these wonderful ingenues, basically ingenues, uh, and they do very well for 5 years or 7 years, and maybe it's because they want to have it all, so they stop and get married and have a couple kids. So they take some time off, and then they come back, and the rhythm's gone, or they come back and they pick a couple bad scripts, and the scripts don't work, and the audience has moved on in the interim between them deciding to have kids and get married and all that. And so there's a whole new pack of 24, 25-year-olds coming in, and the audience gravitates towards them. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What I do know is it's really hard to sustain a career. I mean, Nicole Kidman's had what is coming up on a 30-year career, 35-year career at
Sure.
this point.
Yeah, 35.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
she's a marvelous actress. I think she works too much. I've seen really substandard stuff with her in it. She used to be an imprimatur of quality 25, 20 years ago, and she's not anymore. You see her doing like 6-episode miniseries, and they're not very good. And I'm not sure why. She works a lot, and I think she's a marvelous
What's
actress.
fuel? Yeah, I do too. But what's fueling that?
I don't know. I don't know.
There's kind of a, well, you see it in a lot of the actors that are. She's almost 60.
She's certainly in
So,
her middle 50s. Yeah, yeah.
well, I think more than that. I
And
think
and
she's
and
closing in.
but we don't see. It's a different vibe between in England. Maggie Smith kept working until she couldn't stand up anymore. Literally, couldn't stand up anymore. Judi Dench, ditto. There's a continuum with English actresses where they don't go the plastic surgery route. They age naturally, and nobody says anything. Nobody thinks less of them. Here,
But
if you don't,
Scott, they look at it like a job over there.
yeah,
I
oh,
mean,
absolutely,
I made a movie over there, and they basically said, "We'll call Judy Dench if you want
yeah,
her,"
sure,
because they look at it. They just want to book a gig.
hmm
They're actors.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's different from being a
That's a
star.
different thing. Yes, but Judi Dench was never a movie star in the sense that we're talking about. Maggie Smith was. Maggie Smith was.
Oh, for
She
sure,
had the whole thing
for
going with
sure.
Prime and Miss Jean Brodie and a slew
Mm-hmm.
of pictures thereafter. But she never stopped being an actress. She had this alternate movie star thing going, but she always kept the actress thing going.
Yes.
She always did stage work, and I don't think the stage work is the main thing. It's a different way of looking at your profession.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different way of there's a neediness about American actresses needing to stay relevant. I think
Oh,
is it sexually
terrible.
relevant or relevant that the English simply don't have. I'm watching a
They
show
don't care.
now.
They don't care.
No, they don't. I'm
They
watching
really
a show
don't.
now with Emma Thompson and another marvelous actress whose name escapes me. Basically it's a murder mystery, and Emma Thompson's
Okay.
got looks her age, and she's got mostly white hair. Well, okay, what's Emma Thompson, 60, 62?
Maybe.
Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. But she looks 60. Okay, but she's a good 60, and she's still Emma Thompson, and she's got that wonderful asperity, that
She glows.
cutting through the
She's
bold,
brilliant.
cutting
She's
through the
brilliant
bullshit
and she glows.
attitude. I love Emma
Yes.
Thompson,
Mm-hmm.
and she's
Love
in
her
the
too.
vein of Maggie Smith, and she'll work
Uh-huh.
until she can't stand up anymore. She'll work for the next 25 years, and I love that about English actors. They don't
I
get
do
caught up in
too.
the star mythology. Now we've transitioned from talking about Joan, who was caught up in the star mythology because she invented the fucking star mythology, essentially.
Well, how about how she? I know you. This book you really chronicle. Also, one of your layers here is when she spoke to the press,
hmm
which is fascinating. I mean, you really did a deep dive on her, and she does this interview, and you touch on it at the near the end of the book about her talking about the current crop of actors
hmm
and what she saw in the world. And I felt terrible for her
hmm
because she looked at Easy Rider and thought, "What is this?
Right. She looked at Marilyn
What
Monroe
kind
and thought, "What is this?" Well, any sentient human being over the age of 15 could look at Marilyn Monroe and go, "I know exactly what that is." I mean, come
Yes.
on. I
Right,
mean,
right,
that's a
right.
stunning female creature, for God's sakes, and a
Yes.
wonderful comedian. Just a wonderful. I never crazy about her as a dramatic actress, but I loved her in comedy. But I
I
mean,
sure did
how
too.
could you not realize a movie star on that level? She had the same
Yeah.
glow that Crawford did, but Crawford got in a kind of drew her skirts up around her like a grande dame at a party where someone had just burped, you know, talking about it.
That's right.
It was actually it's very funny, and it's kind of revealing too. It's kind of revealing
And
because
very
The
revealing.
Crawford of 1930 would not have been pulled that attitude about Marilyn Monroe, because the Crawford of 1930 was Marilyn Monroe.
But can I just point out just a difference? And
Mm.
please, you are the great writer and historian,
Nah,
but
nah.
I'm going to make an. I'm going. Yes, you are. You know I adore you. Okay. In the 1930s, we came off a decade where women were in the factory. They
Mhm,
bobbed their hair. They took control of their lives.
mhm,
They had sexual autonomy
mhm,
if they so desired it.
mhm.
They could do anything.
Right.
Hollywood had been built by women, by the likes of people like Anita Luce, I'm just throwing her out
Right.
there, who created characters that were playable.
Mm.
After World War II, my mom was sent back in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I mean, she was a kid and she was sent back. She had got her college degree and she was sent back in the kitchen. Now you're going to raise a family
Mhm.
and have children, which, if you notice, it also really had an impact on Joan, because Joan felt like she had to have a family. Why? She wasn't cut out for it.
No.
And this thing about everybody should have kids, Scott, sometimes I just go, it's giving me a headache.
Yeah, I know.
It isn't for everybody to do it.
No.
You know? But I think people should do what they want, of course. But in the case of Loretta Young, in the case of even we could say Helen Hayes, she had her beautiful daughter Mary,
Yeah.
and then she adopted that wonderful James MacArthur.
Sure.
But there's a story that Helen later adopted kids and brought them into the house, and they destroyed her house. And she said, "I can't do that ever again."
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yes,
I
it's in one of the books, and I was like, "Ooh,
Okay.
this is intense."
Okay.
Yeah. So can you speak to that? Because I feel poor Joan. I mean, you know, first of all, other people saw the behavior, and other people commented, you know, maybe this isn't a road you should go down. But she kind of invented having it all, didn't she?
Yeah. 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 And she saw everybody else doing it, and I think that was uh, and I think maybe she'd wanted to do better than her mother did, you know, because she didn't think
Mm.
her mother was a very good mother. And I think there
Mm.
might have been a little competitive thing that, well, my mother didn't do us any favors, but I think I can do better. And as I said in
Mhm.
the book, she batted 500, and that's great for baseball. It's not too good for kids.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, I can't discount Christina's book completely. I think it's wildly
No.
overstated. I think it's fair to call it overstated. Uh, but it's entirely possible you know, that the idea of having children was simply not something cut out for her, because she had a lot of balls in the air as it was, you know, and between managing her career and worrying about her career and running that house, which was a huge house and a very hard operation to run by herself, and husbands, there were four of them. Uh, she might have been stretching herself a little too far. And I don't think she had a
Mhm.
natural facility. She was a fretter. She fretted a fair amount.
That
And
her anxiety came through
yeah, yeah,
in the
yeah,
book.
yeah.
Yeah,
And that
it
was,
came
she
through.
wasn't going to get rid of that. That was baked in her by her mother, and by the insecurity of that childhood, and by her feeling of not knowing how to read or write on a college level, you know,
Hmm.
and feeling totally outclassed and outgunned by all the other girls
God,
in the student
God, they
college.
all said it. All of them is that they wanted an education.
Hmm.
I mean, didn't Ava Gardner say the same thing?
Sure.
They all, these great beauties, I think maybe their transitions would have been not easy, but maybe a little more fluid
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
had they felt like that they were seen for something outside of the
But
face.
you look at all those women. They almost and whether their marriages were successful or mostly unsuccessful, they almost all adopted or had kids. They almost all adopted, had kids, and it rarely worked out. Stanwyck, Didn't work out. Loretta Young, Myrna Loy never had kids. More power to her. I think she understood something about herself. You know?
Myrna got it.
Yeah, she understood. Well, she had a horizon that was broader, I think, than most actresses of that era.
Yes.
She had the big
Yeah.
picture, where she walks away from MGM during the war to do war work. You know, where she becomes a delegate to the United Nations. She was not bound up in the idea of Myrna Loy movie star. She was bound
Right.
up in the idea of Myrna Loy citizen. And her life basically, you see a repetition of that. And also, she was funny and smart and well read. Uh, but a lot of those women all thought they all wanted to have it all. They kept trying. Hedy Lamarr, all those marriages, all those shoplifting charges. Uh,
Down by you,
yeah,
down by you in
tell me about
Florida.
it.
But she was a genius.
She was.
That's the one. She built bombs.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Yes, she did. But you didn't invite her to parties because the ashtrays wouldn't be there when she left. It was well known in Palm Beach. Well known in Palm Beach.
She was a kleptomaniac.
She was a kleptomaniac. Now, why? How do you get from inventing radio waves to being a kleptomaniac in Palm Beach,
I don't
where they
know.
won't invite
I
you to a
don't know.
party? I mean, that is truly, and there are so many sad stories about her that I picked up down here, and they're all just, oh God. And she was broke. I mean, it was all
Mm.
gone. Everything was gone, except she was still Hedy Lamarr movie star, and she'd go to the drugstore and boost stuff there. It was just, and people talk about Joan Crawford.
Okay. All
Give me
right,
a
Scott.
break.
Before I let you go, because I'm going to encourage everybody. I'm going to list all of your canon, but everybody has to run out right now and get Joan Crawford, A Woman's Face by Scott Eyman. You will thank me. It's a propulsive read the way you put the story together. But I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Maybe all these young actresses in the 1930s that were big ingenue stars looked at the box office, and who was the biggest female star of the 1930s? Marie Dressler.
Mhm.
Now, maybe if I was a young actor in 1930, I would look at a woman who's in her 50s, who's working hard and doing big box office movies and think, that'll be me.
Mhm.
Do you think that that had an effect on them?
No,
In the same way that perhaps Nicole Kidman has an effect on the young ingenues who see that they could have children and marry and do a whole thing.
maybe. But Dressler was kind of a one-off. She was kind of a female Wallace Beery, you know? And
Yes,
she was the
she
only one
was.
like that. They tried to replicate her. Paramount had an actress named Alison Skipworth who looked like Marie Dressler's sister. And they made 3 or 4 pictures with her in basically the same kinds of parts, and nothing happened. Uh, because Dressler was a one-off. I mean, she had incredible personality and a sense of humor, and she was a magnificent comedian. Uh, and she couldn't be replicated. But yeah, also you're forgetting Garbo. Garbo was a huge star, and a one-off, another one-off, because as try as they might with Anna Sten, I mean, every studio tried to replicate Garbo, and none of them could. And Garbo got by.
Right down to Pierre Angeli.
Yeah,
They would try
exactly.
to grab a foreign actor and bring
Yeah,
him over, and
yeah.
the new Garbo.
But Garbo was huge in Europe, but she was okay. She was strong here, but she was immense in Europe. And when the war broke out, they lost the European market, and they couldn't make Garbo pictures to make money because the European market was locked up. France, Germany, all those countries, there was nothing, and they couldn't make a Garbo movie for less than $1.2 million, given what they were paying her.
Mm-hmm.
So they gave her, they said, well, we'll come back after the war. And she never came back because she'd saved her money. That's
Mm-hmm.
why she was smart. She didn't have to come back to work and make, uh, 50s melodramas about middle-aged women who couldn't find a man opposite Jeff Chandler. Whereas Crawford did. But Garbo saved
And
her money.
Crawford, don't you think that Joan Crawford, if she was 30 years old today, she'd be on fire in the industry
Oh yeah. Oh
because she knew how to deal with people.
yeah. And
She
also,
would blow up social media. She'd be blowing it up.
right, exactly. She'd be tweeting, and she'd run her own website. She'd run her own website. She would. She,
Yep. I bet she'd have a podcast.
yeah, but I don't think she wouldn't spread herself that thin. And she wouldn't be
Okay.
doubling up and doing movies and streaming and a TV series. That's she'd want to go where the prestige was because she needed prestige. That's why she didn't like TV. I mean, look at how well Loretta Young did at television. You know,
Wow.
but
It's amazing.
but Crawford kind of straight armed television. She didn't really like it because it was 3 days and out, 5 days and out. She really did very little TV. And Lou Wasserman would have given her a lot of work because Lou Wasserman was very loyal to his old clients. And he liked Crawford and she liked him. In fact, that's how she ended up doing the Night Gallery episode directed by Steven Spielberg, which is the best thing she did at the tail end of her career. And if you haven't seen it, I think it's on YouTube. You should see it because she is great. It's her
Okay.
last great performance. And that was Lou Wasserman called her to do a Night Gallery episode. It was the pilot for Night Gallery. And she's in New York, and so she has to drag herself out to L.A. And that was part of the problem. She didn't like flying after Al Steele died because Al Steele would hold her hand while flying, because she was always a nervous flyer. She hated to fly. When she had to go to New York before World War II, she'd always take the train. Well, there's 4 days out of your life. But that was,
Mm.
she didn't like to fly. It terrified her. But Al Steele didn't mind flying, and he convinced her to deal with flying. But after he died, she wasn't crazy about flying anymore either. So she came out and did
Mm.
the Night Gallery episode. It's the best thing she did at the end of her career. But she didn't like television. She didn't trust it.
Damn.
She didn't like the hurry up thing. She didn't like the cameraman because James Wong Howe didn't shoot television, and none of the guys she trusted shot television,
Right.
and so she didn't do a lot of TV. And that's sad because that was a way of keeping yourself current, even if it's not necessarily Mildred Pierce. The script is not Mildred
Mm-hmm.
Pierce quality, but still, that means a different generation is getting acclimated to who you are, you know? And that's not a small
Mm-hmm.
thing when you're a 55 or 60-year-old actress, let's face it. And I think that was a tactical mistake. It might not have been a creative mistake, but it might have been a tactical mistake in terms of keeping
I
her current.
think I think you taught us in this book. I learned a big lesson here is that an actor, part of the anxiety of being an actor is to try to stay where you are or go higher.
Mhm,
You cannot go backwards and you can't go sideways, like you can't do it.
mhm.
You have to find a way to continue to ascend.
Yeah,
And I don't know if that's possible.
it's not easy. See, writers don't really have that problem.
No.
Writers don't have that problem because a writer's personality is so specific to who they are as a person, but an actor's personality is not always specific to who they are as a person. So there are actors who
Right.
are very successful who are nothing like what they play, personally.
Mm-hmm.
But a writer, very difficult to pretend to be something you're not if you're a writer, because the
Mm-hmm.
truth will out. The truth will out.
And Joan Crawford, oh my gosh, she was an amazing human
She
being.
was an amazing human being, and there's a lot to be said for her, and there's a lot to be said about her. And what I wanted to do was get away from, because I read everything about that had been written about Joan Crawford, all the books that had been written, and there was like 8 or 10 before I started mine, and half of them were she was the Virgin Queen, and half of them were she was Cruella de Vil. And I didn't think either one was remotely accurate. I didn't think she was a cartoon character of evil, and I didn't think she was, Mary Mother of Jesus. I think she was a deeply complicated, remarkably talented, and woman with a work ethic that was second to none, and a fascinating life, and perhaps a life that's something of a instructional manual as well, about what you can do and what you can't do, and about knowing your limitations too.
Well, the bibliography herein is the story of Hollywood. It's an incredible the amount of research that you do. I did have a question. Who's Casey Lalonde?
Casey Lalonde is Joan's grandson. As a matter of fact, we're going to be in New York on Friday showing two Joan movies at Museum of Modern Art at their film restoration festival. I'll be introducing Rain, a new
Oh,
restoration of Rain, and I'll be introducing Autumn Leaves, restoration
you're
of
going to show
Autumn
that
Leaves.
too.
On a week of this coming, I think it's this coming Friday. I will double.
This coming Friday?
And
I'm going to try to come.
yeah, and Casey will be showing 10 minutes of the Crawford home movies, Joan's home movies.
So the family is embracing her
Casey is the family at this point. Yes, yes.
because
Well, Casey
Christina's
knew her
gone
pretty.
too.
Casey knew her pretty well. He would get dropped off at her apartment once a month with his sister, and Joan would babysit while his parents went out in the town and went to shows, and would come back at night. And Joan would have them for the whole day, and then take them to Chinatown for dinner because the kids loved the neon lights and the atmosphere of Chinatown. And Joan liked Chinese food, so everybody was happy. So he knew her very well until he was about 6, when she got sick.
Oh, wow. So he has some beautiful
Yeah,
memories. That's really
very
great.
positive memories too.
Fantastic.
Very positive.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's another home run. Joan Crawford, A Woman's Face. That says it all about Hollywood right there. The golden age. Thank you, Scott Eyman.
Thank you, Adriana. Anytime. Always a
Thank
pleasure.
you.